Hello, I'm Craig Peihopa and welcome to another exciting episode of Inspired Achievers. Irish playwright George Bernard Shaw once wrote, "Life is not about finding yourself. Life is about creating yourself." We're going to meet a man today who has achieved academically, creatively, and been honoured by this country in Australia as one of its chosen people, giving him one of the highest civilian honours the country can bestow in being a member of the Order of Australia. If his life was to be put into a painting, I don't believe it could be done so with pastels. I think his life would be painted in bold, striking and vivid colour. I think the man we're about to meet today is one of those people that Ivor Davies may have had in mind when he sang a song called "A Man of Colours." This man is an actor, a singer, a producer, a director, a teacher, a film producer, a film director, and an all-round good guy. He has worked with incredible people ranging from musicians, actors, cinematographers. He's even worked with people like Russell Crowe, Cuba Gooding Jr. and the late, great Richard Harris in Camelot that toured around Australia. He has 5 albums to his credit and has been internationally acclaimed for his 5,000 performances in musical theatre. Through it all, he's had extreme highs and extreme lows, but has been supported by an incredible woman and a wonderful family. From an early age, he had an incredible pedigree that has set him on a course which he continues and expands upon. One of the things I found when immersing myself into his life over these last couple of weeks is that his integrity to what he does interprets and reveals things that make an audience feel something. I told him that I had grown up listening to a song my mother loved by Dean Martin, and when I heard his version of the song, it was as though I had never heard it before. He has an interpretive quality that can move an audience. One lady made a comment online that I saw that said this man's name, and I turned to powder. Not quite sure what she meant by that, but ultimately I get the message. He has the ability to make a difference and change lives. So without any further ado, let's meet this amazing man, Mr. Peter Cousens. Wow. Thank you.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for that beautiful introduction. I was very moved to witness someone's heart in that way. Describing someone, I don't know whether I know that person, but I was deeply moved. Thank you.
No, well, for people at home, just a few short weeks ago, I watched a movie called Freedom, and it starred Cuba Gooding Jr. It was about the slave trade. And within the first few minutes, I found myself asking, what sort of film is this? When I heard and was moved by the vocals of Jubilant Sykes. I've never heard a voice that reached me so quickly as his did. And I loved the fact that it was introducing him to film or to cinema. And how interesting that it was also your directorial debut. I heard that when you got the role to direct the film, through a series of events, some may have seen them as mistaken events, I don't, and you told the cast and crew, this is my first time, you know more about this than I do, but let's work together. That's incredible. So many people would want to big note themselves and say, hey, I've made it, I'm here, but not you. And I think from what I've been able to find, you created this environment where everybody felt a part of something special. So what made you do that? That was difficult, to put your heart on the line in front of so many professionals. Your cinematographer has worked on amazing films. What was it like?
Well, it was terrifying, to be honest. And I remember that speech on the first day of our filming, and we had 150 people on the set, and we were outdoors. We were creating what was probably one of the most violent moments in the film, as well as, interestingly, one of the most musical. So it was a wonderful combination. But I was thrown into a situation where although I knew a bit about film, but directing something in this way was something I hadn't experienced, although I directed in other mediums. So the challenge was, how do I go about this in terms of relating to these people who were highly experienced? And I really only had a couple of I expect things to fall back on, and one was instinct and intuition, and often we don't know what we know. We discover that, and what's been absorbed over years of experience, you have to have faith and trust in, and trust, and then surrendering yourself to that trust, and also having enormous trust in other people. So I'd come from a situation which just previously leading up to this film of discovering a deep sense of humility, and I realised that we are so dependent on each other in everything we do. And in this situation, I would say, look, this is my first film, and I'm going to ask a lot of silly questions, and I need you to come with me on this, because we can jointly do something special. And I realised too, as I did it, and I had a wonderful crew. Americans are fantastically welcoming. They believe in success. They want you to have success, and they want to help you have that success, because your success is their success. And it's a wonderful kind of interplay of energy, if you like. And in this case, my job, I discovered, was really to have a vision for this film, make sure everyone understood what that vision was, and then let them get on with their jobs. And finally, the great thing I learned about being director is being prepared to make a decision, and make a decision quickly, and trust it. And that's really how we worked. We had 25 days to film this rather huge film. We had 13 days with Cuba. He'd just come off the Butler, I think it was, in New Orleans, and we ran into cyclones and all sorts of things in this 25-day period, but we sort of stuck to it. And we had two stories at once, if you know the film, obviously, one set 100 years earlier and one set in about the 1860s. But this process, this whole, if you like, spiel, which became embedded in the way I operated in this situation, started on that first day of filming, and it had started previously with my involvement with Dean Cundy, who was this extraordinary cinematographer, and it ended, right in post-production in New York, where we 6 months, editing and then post-production and colour grading and all sorts of things, dealing with these extraordinary people who'd done extraordinary films. And here I was saying the same thing. Well, look, this is my first time, and I'm going to ask some silly questions, and come with me. So that was that experience for me, and it taught me an enormous lot about, in terms of about myself, but it also taught me a lot about film, because I I asked silly questions and I got some fantastic answers because people want to help.
Yes.
I've talked enough.
No. One of the things that I believe is that there are no such things as silly questions. I believe that every question helps you understand the world around you better. And I've often told people that who ask me questions about photography. And I just think every question may just help you, or in some cases, may help those with you. And, sorry.
No. Well, just yes, it is. That's very much the case. And in this creative environment where I work, for large tracts of my life at the moment, it's a very creative world, and our mantra is there is never any right or wrong, and so therefore whatever question you might ask is shouldn't be judged in any way that it's being silly or wrong or right, but it's just there are often just better choices in what you do. Yeah. That's what we really kind of try and instill in the people we work with creatively. So you get Cuba Gooding Jr. He's an Academy Award winning actor. He rocks up fresh from The Butler, great film. What was he like? Extremely funny. He was enormously funny and a lot of fun to be with. He was also quite tricky in a way, in that he in the same. When you look at it from his point of view, he'd walked into a low budget East Coast film, independent film director who came from musicals. God knows what the Phantom of the Opera had anything to do with this. So he'd probably done a bit of due diligence and thought, okay, I'm doing this film, I've committed to it. But I don't know what it's going to, and who these people are. So that became a sort of an interesting kind of journey with us and as I say, we had 13 days with him. But look, we met in LA, and we had dinner with one of my daughters and his wife at the time, and my wife. Which was an hysterical night, and also in post-production in New York, he and I used to sort of have late night dinners and sort of bit of New York madness with in a big black car roaming around the streets of
Wonderful.
Of the village. So it was an interesting time, and I enjoyed his company immensely, and he was a great help to me too. Especially in post-production, I really appreciated his input in the film. And also, there was, as you know, the film deals with Black America at that time, and the politics of that were, I expect they were beginning in a way. On the surface at the time, that has now been, the journey of that is now a much deeper and more difficult and more complex situation. But I was guided by a large number of African Americans there who obviously are part of the film, and there were some very, very confronting situations with the actors being chained and whipped, and we worked in some protocols because because there was a lot of female slaves, so we made sure that it was only other women who chained them. We tried to sort of keep the politics between us all very, very transparent and open, and we talked about a lot of that, and it was really fascinating. Without the activism of now, things are very complex now in America, and I don't think we could make this film there now.
Yes, those issues that you mentioned certainly had crossed my mind. I went to what was once the Lorraine Motel, where Dr. Martin Luther King was killed, and it's now a civil rights museum. And many of those issues, I was wondering personally, how did you approach those in America, with Americans. It would have been a very sensitive subject, but the fact that you discussed it and have shared that with us is just wonderful. And the way it was handled was expertly done for someone who started in this film. It's incredible. But what was the feeling like for you? I understand your life prior to leaving had its ups and downs, but all of a sudden, how wonderful is it to have people who believe in you? That must be amazing, to have people who believed in an idea, in a vision that you had to put something like this together and back you. You live for 99 days in a hotel in Connecticut while your wife and family are back here creating your vision. What was it like?
I think I was on a journey towards some sort of redemption in a way. The belief really in me came from someone else initially. So your description of other people, of gathering other people in a way to believe in a particular vision, personally, someone else had actually gathered me into their orbit and believed in me. So that sense of, it's wonderful the influence and impact we can have on each other.
Absolutely.
And this particular friend who became a friend and over those years, but initially just had a singular belief in me, which I'd never really quite experienced before. Very God-fearing man, and as a consequence, I had some extraordinary kind of spiritual experiences while filming and making that film, because there were so many elements in that film that are driven by values and spirit that makes the film very special, combined with the layer of music. They're having 11 songs in a film about the Underground Railroad and slavery. It's a very different film from 12 Years a Slave, for instance, which is a very, very gritty and desperate film. And in many ways, that's why it would be difficult to make this film that borders on not being a musical, but being, people would argue, possibly trivialised by music. I think the reverse. I think music actually heightens anything and everything, and I certainly think it heightens the film. But it makes it sit in a different world and a different environment, creatively, which is fine. But and telling a very difficult story. So
I would be surprised if there were no spiritual moments or moments that took you away from yourself to appreciate everything that you were a part of. I know the power of having someone who believes in you and backs you. Each of us walking through the world have weaknesses and difficulties that we often try to hide and overcome. But to be engaged in such a cause, it's impossible not to be affected by it. And for me, the other layer of the story about Newton, who wrote Amazing Grace, added a layer which was just simply wonderful. And as I said earlier, I was watching the film and I was thinking, is that it? It's over? I was riveted by it and became really disappointed that the film didn't achieve more acclaim or more commercial success, which I believe it really deserves. And I really was amazed by your journey. I even noticed in the credits you did some revisions of script, And so you were hands-on in it, on it, and through it. And so what a feeling it must be to sit back at where you are and think, wow, did I do that?
There is that sense of immortality about it. And I use that in a bit of a trivial way, but something that remains solid, because I come from a world where everything disappears in a moment. You know, everything I perform just disappears into the ether, really. Theatre is like that, and you know, singing, and it's if it's not recorded on film, and I have, you know, don't have too much, as we were talking earlier about product on film, but I think this whole idea of you know, having 150 people waiting for you to, and they schooled me up in America. They said a director is the greatest job in the world. Never will you have 150 people absolutely and utterly committed and waiting upon your every word to then go into action, to go into a moment. And it is an incredible responsibility, but also an incredible high. It's an incredible feeling, and I think, but it is based on them believing in you and you gathering those forces to believe in what you're doing. And I think now, interestingly enough, that for me is what I am driven to do with the creative people around me, that I am obsessed about making sure they understand that people believe in them. You know, and I think that's the secret to releasing that creative spirit in a uninhibited and in a joyful way and in a confident way, that it is knowing that people believe in you. And that sort of influence, that sort of impact, I think, is extremely important. And I deal with, you know, I'm coaching and creating, you know, 17 and 18-year-old singer-songwriters here, and it is enormously gratifying in a way, but also there's a responsibility to unlock that. And I wish I'd had that very early on, although there were some major influences in my life that had those sorts of impacts on me, in fact, but but probably not in any conscious way. But this is a conscious desire to unlock their potential as creative artists, and that is I think the centerpiece of that is getting them to understand that other people believe in it, therefore you need to believe in yourself.
Yes.
Ultimately.
That's incredible. I saw recently an interview with Tom Hanks, who was talking about what it's like to act in a lot of movies that he's done, produce, and also I think he's had some directorial experience as well. But he was saying that whenever he's involved in a project like a film, he walks away and analyses his character in relation to the characters he's played or the things that he's done. And he said he has become a better person introspectively because of those insights into others. I suspect it must be also the same or similar for you.
To a certain extent, I think that sort of self-reflection and that analysis of you know, the human condition, which is very much a you know, you're going back to Stanislavski and the kind of the systems of creating character, and there is, I expect there is a bit of that, but you know, there's a lot of actors out there who are arseholes, you know.
A lot of photographers too, for that matter.
a lot of anyone. So maybe I don't know how that hangs together, but you know, that's a nice theory of Tom's. I think and I think we do say you know, internally in actor training and creative training and all this sort of stuff, that we hope that the kind of things we do explore, whether it's character or whether it's just the way people are or the way the world is, and we look at it from a particular perspective, that we are helping to influence particularly young people to be better people. And I think that's the self-reflection. That's very much a part of the creative work, to reflect on what you're doing and making judgment calls about that, and making choices about what you might want to do or how you want to do something. So, there is a bit of a layer, I expect, of self-awareness, which I think is important, and we think we're helping to create better people. And well, who knows? Because we are.
That's the goal.
That's the goal. But people are, we are also so fascinatingly different. And
yes. You were born in Tamworth, which for those people who are outside Australia may not realise, it's a regional town some 4.5–5 hours away from Sydney City, and I really like Tamworth. It's become the country music capital of Australia, but your parents were in the local show business there. You played in The King and I with your mum, and I believe at age 18 you went to London for the first time, and I read that you saw 15 shows in 10 days.
Yes, it was actually 12, I think.
Oh, 12?
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah, because a couple of matinees.
So I figured, but I was trying to understand what that would have been like for a young man from Tamworth to be sitting there watching these productions. What went through your mind?
Yes, look, as an 18-year-old in that environment, having left, and I was at school in Armidale, actually, a boarding school, and it was, and I actually had never seen a straight play. Like I'd been in Gilbert and Sullivan's, yes, and as a child, some Rodgers and Hammerstein musicals with my mum and dad, but I'd never actually seen a play on stage, professionally done. I'd seen a couple of Gilbert and Sullivan's in Brisbane, so I had no real experience of the theatre, but I had immersed myself in Laurence Olivier, who was a yes, wonderful English actor manager, and I'd read everything there was to know about Laurence Olivier, and all I dreamt about was performing in London on the West End. So when I got there at the age of 18, I just wandered up and down Shaftesbury Avenue and dreamt about what it would be like to actually perform in one of these theatres, and I spent the rest of the time going to the theatre, and I did see some wonderful plays. And some Gilbert and Sullivan, and a couple of musicals. In fact, I saw the musical Billy with Michael Crawford well before, things like. But it was an extraordinary, like a absolute culture shock,
Yeah, that's what I was trying to imagine. Coming from your roots, although you were introduced to that early, but wow. To be in London. Yeah, and I sort of dream come true. And again, looking back, you have all these dreams as kids, and you it's amazing how sometimes life actually plants you in some form or other with that sort of dream being realised. Yeah. Did something whisper inside you going, this is a life for you? Now, we'll come back to the West End. Tell me about Madame Marianne.
Oh, Madame Marty.
Marty.
Madame Marianne Marty, yes. Look, she, in terms of these influences that one has, whether they believed in you or not, it's who knows, but that was the impression one gets. So, Marianne Marty was probably, a major influence on my singing. And also, singing and also kind of artistic sensibilities. She was an Austrian Jewish woman who'd escaped the Nazis, and I think she was pushed across the border in a pram, I think the story went. Wow. Anyway, she ended up in Australia and was very much in the early days of the Australian Opera, a thing called the Opera League. And she opened a studio, and she taught June Bronhill, and was as well as Lyndon Terracini, who's now the head of the Opera Australia, and others. And strangely enough, my brother-in-law happened to be June Bronhill's manager for a short period of time, and I got to know June quite well as a sort of schoolboy. And then when I was 18, I'd come back from my sojourn overseas, and she introduced me to Marty, and I became one of her students for a couple of years as I was at university and before I went off to drama school. So, and she was a small, wizened woman with gnarled, sort of arthritic fingers, and she'd play the piano, and she had a poodle who would sit there and sort of, but was sort of strangely chaotic but strangely wonderful. And I still have all her original exercises, which I actually still do as a singer, as warm-ups and things. And she taught me about what it is to feel a heightened sense of emotion in a creative and artistic sense. And I discovered that with her. I discovered what that actually means and what it meant, and how that manifests itself in singing, to the point where the dog would roar and scream and bark, if I hit an appropriate note that Marty approved of, and somehow the dog subliminally sort of knew that approval was being given. So that was my experience with her, and she was. I became very close to her and for a while, and then I sort of moved on. I got very involved with becoming an actor, and I actually wasn't that interested in singing for a long period of my life, long time.
And so, who was it that reignited the flame for you to go back and sing?
It's probably my wife, actually. We got married, and we'd both done a play called Nicholas Nickleby together for the Sydney Theatre Company, and then I was also doing Camelot at the time as well, and so I sort of nibbled around the edges of a musical, obviously with Camelot, and Richard Harris was another major influence on me because he was a wonderful actor, but also had this ability to sing in a way, not particularly well, kind of in terms of beauty of tone, but in terms of beauty of interpretation and heart and storytelling and narrative. He was a master, and he again, I expect again this sort of sense for someone believing in you, and I couldn't believe it, but he did actually believe in me. He said, you could really, if you could really master this, you could go a long way. I remember him saying to him, and he took me, but put his arm around him. He said, "Now, just go out there and basically do it like he did it," which was big and bold and heightened. And suddenly, all that stuff from Marty started to make sense because it was a big and bold theatrical experience. And story, obviously Camelot, and I was playing the evil son, so I had the opportunities to do that. But that was the message from Harris: be big and bold and uncompromising and fearless. And I got the big and the bold. I don't know whether I got the fearless because that's the hardest thing to get rid of. But but after all that, and my wife and I settled down, and we were doing a series called Return to Eden together on television, and she said to me, and I'd sung at our wedding, and she said, I think, we don't know what the work situation is going to be like in the future, and she said, I think you should just try and get back to singing, and I had a few lessons before, but seriously, and she said, I've found this ad for this singer called Rita Hunter, and she's got a studio in Tarahumara. And I looked at it in the ad, and this is probably really politically incorrect, but I said, it's Rita Hunter, the name rings a bell. Is she the black one or the fat one? And I discovered, and I wrote a diary of a little journal of my first meeting with Rita, who I adored, and her husband, John Thomas, a Welshman, believe it or not, with a name like John Thomas. And I have written this journal about me being so aghast that I'd even had that, what I thought was a witty response to my wife. But anyway, I spent 3 or 4 years with Rita and John, and this was the period between, I expect, just before I entered into this musical theatre world seriously, and became a singer, so to speak. And I'd call myself a singer because Rita and John believed in me, and they again, put me on a road to where I am now, in a way, which is. As one ages, the voice remains intact, that stamina remains intact. The stamina not only to sing 8 shows a week, but also the stamina to be able to sing, well into your older age. And that was exactly what they promised me, and that's exactly what's happened.
Wow. If we backtrack a little bit, you're touring around Australia with Richard Harris. He asked you to go to the US and tour with him. He was so pleased with you, and obviously you'd fitted into a routine together. I can't imagine what it was like to be side of stage and hear him sing things that most people today wouldn't even know. And I played him singing Camelot just the other day, and just smiled. We only know him as an actor. He sang MacArthur Park, but you never went.
The opportunity to do this television series, was just a more, for some odd reason at the time, was just a more attractive choice. And also because my wife had been also cast in Return to Eden, and so it meant there was just too much upheaval in the early part of our marriage, and it just seemed right to sort of to stick where I was. And I expect I was fearful, too. So that was that reason, and I don't regret it in any way. But it would have been a very different journey for me now, if I'd gone off.
Yes, but for me, again, to have someone believe in you like Richard Harris, to want to have you with him in the US, incredible. And it must have been, all I could see when I've gone looking into your life was there have been a series of, I'll call them heroes, that have stood out clearly to me, that have said, we're here for you. I had the feeling that not only were you blessed, it's almost like you've been guided on your path through life, and you've had incredible people around you. Now, let's jump to, you get a phone call from, you'd been in Phantom of the Opera. You get a phone call, I believe, from Cameron McIntosh. Come over to London. We want you to be the Phantom. You race around in 10 days to move your family. You hop on a Qantas flight, and because you're a naturally caring person, 1 or 2 of your children had chickenpox. And so you were freely willing to share that on the way.
We didn't know at the time. We only discovered it when we landed.
And so you're thrust into this whirlwind, for want of a better term, for a period of a year. What was that like?
Well, it was thrilling, and it was a sort of a gift, if you like, from Cameron. Another major influencer on my life, someone who really cared. He was especially in those days, all the way through the 90s. So I first met him in 1988 and worked for him then, basically just about, with a few exceptions, all the way through that decade. And he was the most nurturing and the most caring of producers, insofar as that he had a group of actors who he found, and he finds them all around the world, and he basically gave us careers and nurtured those careers to the point where for me, the pinnacle was to be taken to London to play the Phantom. But there've been others, people like Phil Quast, who with in Les Miserables, and he's that opportunity that Cameron gave Philip just led to an enormously beautiful career he's had. That is very unsung in Australia. Not many people know what actually Philip has achieved, and what people he's worked with, and what he's done is miraculous. And he's a beautiful singer and beautiful actor, and but because of Cameron, and that, I think those sorts of gifts and that care, again, there's people believing in you. And yes, going to London was a whirlwind. It was enormous fun, and very difficult initially for my wife and family, because the three of them were stuck in a hotel for 10 days. I disappeared to America to work with Hal Prince. Now there's another one, another huge influence in me. And we'd actually corresponded earlier, because he was that sort of guy. I'd written to him about something, and we responded, and he'd obviously, I knew what he was about, and he, being the theatre animal he was, I think he knew about anyone and everyone's career anywhere around the world. So anyway, so I spent some days with the New York cast of Phantom, and with Hal, and then came back to be greeted by the chickenpox that had now manifested itself in, as chickenpox does, one after the other. So, then in a whirlwind of 10 or 2 weeks rehearsal, I opened in London, and had those mad experiences of I think you probably know the story of the boat failing and,
yes.
and
walking on water.
Walking on water, those stories. You have to come to the show to see that. And so yeah, it was a wonderful time, and we didn't want to leave and Hal had actually cast me in Showboat back in Australia. And he'd done that in the first few months, really. He came over to see the show, and then sat in my dressing room and said, "Would you come back to Australia and do his production of Showboat," which was at the time a huge production, and out of Canada. And in many ways, I said yes a bit too early, and I was committed to it. But we would have probably preferred to have stayed and continued on with our time with Cameron and that career path in London.
When you were on stage, what theatre were you performing Phantom in? What was the name of it?
Majesty's.
The Majesty's.
Haymarket, yeah.
Had you been there?
No. I'd been across the road, I think, to the Theatre Royal. I saw a production of Richard the Second there, yeah. Where these two actors, a guy called Pascoe and I can't think of the other actor, and they alternated the roles. I've never forgotten it, but that was one of the plays I'd seen, so I knew the area.
Right. Well, the reason I asked is because I thought it would have been almost poetic to have you performing on stage at Her Majesty's, thinking, that's the chair I sat in. It must have been, although it was across the road, it still must have been an enormously wonderful feeling to think, my childhood, my youthful dream has come to pass.
Unbelievable, actually, when I think of it. And interestingly enough, we talk about dreams coming true, and people having dreams, and sometimes people are frightened of having big dreams. They call them smart dreams, crazy, mad, dreams that people would think were beyond realisation. But that whole, if you like, device of the dream is very much a part of what we try and impress upon the creative people that I work with, mainly because having a big dream means you're going to go on a journey towards something, and you are going to meet, in trying to realise that dream, a whole lot of people who are going to take you on other little journeys and take you this way and that way and move. And you may never actually experience that dream, that huge dream, but boy, that journey will be so amazingly gratifying and fascinating and learning, and you'll discover, of course, that the dream actually exists within.
Yes.
It doesn't actually sit out there, but that doesn't matter, because that journey you've had, the experiences you've had, is actually greater than the dream itself.
Wonderful. Well, it would be remiss of us not to run through some of the musical theatre you've been a part of. We mentioned Phantom of the Opera. There's Les Miserables. There's Miss Saigon. Now, I lived for 2 years in the Philippines and have had lots of interactions with Filipino people at so many varying levels. A wonderful country. What was that like for you?
Miss Saigon.
Miss Saigon. Dealing with, of course, the Vietnam War, and but there were lots of Filipinos in there.
It was probably my most treasured experience in the theatre, in those big commercial musicals, because of the Filipino people and just what they brought to that environment in the theatre during the rehearsal, and then as we played the couple of years we performed together. They were enormously spiritual, very Catholic, very Christian people, and there was always a prayer before we went on, and also they were in many ways living the story, this whole idea of the American dream and finding another life from the appalling conditions of the Vietnam War. By finding a husband, I expect that was the dream. But for those, particularly the boys and the girls, but mainly I expect the women who had come from the Philippines, they were earning money which they'd never ever earned before. They were, and Joanne, who I played opposite, she was sending money back so her family could have a telephone. They'd never had a telephone, so there was that sort of sense of surviving in a different way because of their experience in the musical, and which meant that and this is another thing I discovered, the actual doing of that musical, the actual performing of it, beyond the making of it, but the actual doing of it, the performing of it became extremely meaningful because of those layers of life that was sitting underneath it. Here I was a middle-class guy and living in a comfortable place in Sydney, but I felt I was very much a part of this extraordinary journey these people were on, that I was more than vicariously sharing, but actually helping to happen, to make it happen with them. And that was enormously kind of, I treasure that time. And I think it taught me a little bit about that happiness, if you like, and happiness isn't the word, but true's kind of satisfaction, I expect you can say, comes from being able to find meaning and purpose in what you're doing.
Yes.
And that is the thing for me. If you want to describe it as being happy, leisure doesn't do it for me. Listening to music doesn't do it for me. What does it for me is finding something purposeful and meaningful. To enact in some way.
Well, when I lived in the Philippines, I got to mingle with people who lived in nipa huts, which were made of bamboo. And depending on the money that they had, which was scant at best, the gaps in the bamboo flooring were wider. And I have always been a little larger than the average Filipino. And so I was many times invited into places I was worried I'd fall through their floor. But I went into one house, which I think sums up the meaning and the purpose that we're talking about. And on the wall there was pictures of people I assumed were her children. which had all graduated from university. And I said, tell me about the photos on the wall. I love photos in houses. I'm often found staring at them, trying to absorb something of their history and their place. And she said, the names I don't remember, but what I do recall is that each one of them had been paid through university and were living overseas. They were doctors, nurses, lawyers. And I said, I don't mean to be rude, but how did you afford that? This was in the 80s, some many years before Australia got behind recycling. She said, I told the council to dump the rubbish in my yard. So whenever they collected rubbish, they dumped it in her yard. Her and her husband would go through, sort the rubbish, sell what they could, and jettison the rest. That's how they put their kids through. And you'd have to, like I was there trying to fight the tears thinking, wow, these are sacrifices that I didn't hear a lot of in this country I was raised in. And I developed a great love for people who, in spite of their economic situation, seemed happier than many of the people that I knew here. And I developed a lot about myself there, thinking there's a lot more to life than I had thought. My father passed away when I was 14, and I was a well-balanced child. I grew up with chips on both shoulders, and here I was in a country with people who had much less than I did. I would try and tell them, I'm not rich, and they said, but you're here, we can't go there. It's hard to argue with that. And I think, looking at your life, it's just so wonderful. So if we go away from the musicals for a moment and all of that, you've become an ambassador for White Ribbon. And for those people who aren't aware, this is a program with an aim to stop men's violence against women. I have a sister who I paused thinking, am I revealing too much too soon, who has been the victim of some of this violence. And it's a very real, palpable thing for me that stood out when I learned about you. What drew you to that?
When I was in Melbourne doing Les Miserables, we'd already had one daughter, and we had a second daughter. It was born just prior to the opening night in Melbourne at the Princess, and we were living in Hawthorn at the time, and there was a series of sort of major rapes and violence and going on at Melbourne at the time, and I just sort of had a bit of an epiphany, and I thought, oh, you know, I've got two daughters, and I started to read various feminist tracts, I expect, although one I sort of got attracted to was written by an American actor called Refusing to Be a Man, which was, it sounds a bit naff, but it really was about trying to reflect on what it is in men's nature that maybe causes this violence and how we can maybe look at and reflect on what men do. Now, this is really early days of although it was the late 80s, I joined a group called Men Against Sexual Assault, a very small little kind of activist group in Melbourne, and they had a demonstration. And I went along and dragged a few of my mates from Les Mis to it. And we sort of got enamoured with what obviously was being said, that men need to take responsibility for each other in this, and to try and I expect re-look at the way we behave with women in a very everyday, superficial way. many of the stuff, a lot of this has actually was early sort of second wave feminism, and we kind of grasped onto it to the point where we then went on tour with Les Miserables, and in each community I would contact the local community area, and we'd get hold of photostat machines and all sorts of stuff, and we'd find out how to do this, but we would then create a demonstration, Men Against Sexual Assault, and we had banners and we'd walk through the street singing bits of Les Miserables. We were fully supported by Cameron and the Australian producers of Les Mis, and we used to hold sort of men's meetings, which all the girls would come to as well, and we'd discuss all this stuff about, I'm smiling, but because I'm smiling at the memory, but the topic was obviously very serious, and we had it was very, very bonding, I expect, as we created these demonstrations in Brisbane, in Perth. We had a sort of a town hall meeting in Adelaide, and I can't remember whether we did it in Auckland, because we toured to Auckland as well. But that then led me into this as an activist, I expect. I felt again that and I'd become a bit of a public figure. People would, come and talk to you about stuff and get interviewed on television. So I thought I might as well kind of channel that into something purposeful. And so I joined another group with Rosemary Sinclair, who was organising this child protection. NAPCAN, the National Association for the Prevention of Child Abuse and Neglect. So I was associated with them, and I became their ambassador, and I used to have this opening or sort of launch each year the various theme for NAPCAN, and I'd give the sort of speech. And that went on for some years, and I then sort of morphed into I went away overseas for a while, then I came back, and the White Ribbon campaign was sort of beginning, and I got involved with that organisation for a while. I've now sort of focused my attention on human trafficking as a result of the Freedom film. So, and it's connected obviously, because we're dealing with women who are mostly women who are caught up in some sort of abusive situation, deprivation of liberty, etc. in Sydney, in Australia. Right. So that's the focus of that, with organisation called Freedom Hub, of which I'm a patron. So that's where my head is at the moment in terms of any activism that I might be involved in. But it's a very, very complex cause, if you like, and run by a beautiful woman called Sally Irwin, who has sort of been just the bastion of this movement in Australia.
So, we mentioned earlier that you had worked with Russell Crowe, Cuba Gooding Jr., Richard Harris. Who else have you worked with?
Well, one of the highlights of my life was as a NIDA student was to be sent off to the ballets and the operas that were on in Sydney to be a supernumerary. So we'd stand on the stage dressed in period costume and sell fish or whatever. And the first highlight was for me was joining the Australian Ballet as a supernumerary, and there in the dressing room was Graham Murphy and Janet Vernon, who were these subversive, in the ensemble or the chorus or the corps, I think they call them, who were desperate to leave the sort of the rigours and the discipline, the conservatism of the Australian opera and create their own, dance company. And they were outrageous on stage. They were such beautiful dancers, but also very naughty, and Graham used to have us all in hysterics as we were on the side of the stage watching and waiting to see what he was going to get up to. Anyway, they left, but that started a lifelong friendship with Graham. And the other one I was sent to was the old Regent Theatre here in Sydney before it was pulled down, and it was we were in the dungeons of this. It really was like this weird wet, mouldy dungeon where we changed again into tights and cod pieces and whatever, because we were on stage with the London Festival Ballet's production of Romeo and Juliet by Prokofiev, starring Rudolf Nureyev.
No.
So there we were, just this far away from this extraordinary dancer. And it was a huge highlight. But the great thing was he didn't want to bar any of us, but there were many of these crossover scenes in the darkness where we'd have to come running on as directed, to take up our positions as whatever. And all you'd get from this voice coming through the middle of us going, fuck off, fuck off, fuck off. As he burst his way trying to get off stage. But, he was, again, one of those extraordinary people who, just in observation,
a master of his craft.
Yeah. Beautiful.
Yeah.
And that, in fact, that the reason why that whole memory, because on our final night, I got a phone call from my brother-in-law to tell me that my father had a stroke and was being taken to hospital, and he died a week later. After that, I flew up the next morning to Lismore, or to Maclean actually, Grafton, Maclean, where he was, and he died a week later. In fact, on the day of my sister's wedding, but he'd sort of indicated that before that he wanted the wedding to go ahead. So, yes, that experience with.
Did you keep that from your sister? That information?
Well, none of us knew that he died the morning of the wedding, because I rang from Sydney just before we went off was a daytime wedding, and just to check that he was okay, because no one knew what the outcome, especially in those days. Strokes were handled, I think, probably without any of the extraordinary technology we have now. And he was okay, but what I didn't know is my mother had rung an hour later, and because she was also in Sydney, and he died while she was on the phone, and she didn't say anything to anyone until after the wedding. Yeah. Well,
that was a blessing.
It was a blessing, but it was an extraordinary kind of example of a major influence, in all our lives is our mothers, for better or for worse. But for my mother, her extraordinary courage, and what then she achieved in the next 30 odd years of her life was an inspiration, amazing.
If we were to bring all of this to a close, if there was someone watching the video impressed with your life, inspired by it, what advice could you share with them that might help them put their dreams into some sort of focus or reality?
I think for me it's been signposted, if you like. My life has been there have been various signposts that have been planted there by people, by personalities, by the energy of someone, as I said, about this someone to believe in you. And along that journey I've learnt a lot, I've experienced a lot, and I've acquired a set of values and a view of the world and relationships and all that sorts of things. And there are many things that I believe to be right and true and honourable and effective in my relationships with people. So I think there comes a point in your life where you have to decide how you are going to influence the world. And I think all of us, it's not a people sort of say, I'm really honoured to do this, or it's a great pleasure to do something for you. But it's not that. It's a duty. We have a duty to give to each other. To share your knowledge. Now, whether people accept it or or that's fine. It's their choice, and no one wants to try and force anything onto anyone else. But you do have a duty, I think, to share your experience of the world, because it is just as legitimate and just as beautiful and just as potentially impactful as anything else. And we all, whether it's in our families, in the microcosm of our small worlds, the way fathers particularly can influence in such a positive way. And we hear such violence and bad, men do get bad press, but it is a tiny number, because I know that men generally are wonderful human beings, and we have a role to play that's actually very very defined, and it can be messed around by politics and particularly attitudes and fads and the way people identify each other. But basically, in my mind, men have a really important function to play in the lives of their children, the lives of women, and the lives of each other, and we have a duty to kind of to pass that on.
Well, I loved you sharing that insight, and I think for me, I lost lots of weddings as a photographer when COVID was announced, and I saw so much money just evaporate from cancellations. I sat there and thought, I need to reinvent myself. I need to do something more. And I think if I was to look at your life, for me, it is an example of reinventing yourself, of finding new ways and making something more. So thank you for all that you've done and that you continue to do. So on a closing question, let me ask you this. Where to from here? What are you involved with now? Well,
I've just completed a master's in creative writing, and so writing is something which I'm sort of pushing on towards. I'm also fascinated by academia, so I'm interested in that part of the world. I'm also devising a new creative artist musical theatre diploma course here, which we'll launch next year, which is basically a tertiary version of what we do with secondary school students in terms of how we pass on that self-belief and that sense, that confidence, but with an added bonus of being able to train young people in the world of not only as a musical theatre performer, but also as a creative artist, a songwriter, and someone who can independently look after themselves as musicians. So there's that. I've also just completed a 6-episode streamed version for television of the Daniel Morecambe abduction in Queensland, and so that's down the pipeline hopefully, yeah, I've got a little cabaret show I'm doing a couple of weeks. I'm very, very busy in that way.
And where's the cabaret show playing at?
At Claire's Kitchen in Oxford Street in Sydney.
So if you're interested, please go and see it. So Peter, I don't think there are enough words in my vocabulary to express how grateful I am for you. I indicated to you, and for those at home, I agonised when I had done some research and found an email. I'd agonised over, what am I doing? Should I do this? Will he even respond? You responded 20 hours after I sent it. And I was elated. I rang one of my sisters and I was going, he responded. So,
well, it was a very gracious email. It was beautifully written, may I say. But this is true of many things. I had a kid from the Conservatorium of Sydney who wrote to me and just sort of, with all the kind of chutzpah and enthusiasm of an 18-year-old, talking about he's what he does and what he do, and could he come and have a chat and look around this building and see how he could fit in. And I just got back to him immediately and said, sure, come on over, because of the absolute enthusiasm and desire to be part of something, and that person is going to be just a terrific put it this way, that person would respond to an opportunity.
Yes.
And I think, again, the duty is to create opportunities, and that's again what I'm interested in. I've got a thing called the Global Creative Initiative Planet, which is this organisation out of New York, which is devising these and creating these streamed concerts all around the world, connected and being streamed into orphanages and refugee camps and hospitals around the world. And last month we did one out of India, which was to kind of commemorate World Autism Day. And so all these performers, young performers from around the world, sort of stream performances for an hour or so, and we're raising awareness for whatever. And anyway, this is something I'm involved in as well, and we have a number of our talent development project graduates involved in that as well.
Well, I love that you give back to people, or you lift, you inspire, and it just makes such a difference. I think in closing, Glenn A. Baker said to me that enthusiasm changes the world. It opens doors, it makes everything possible. And I certainly have boundless amounts of it, and I thank you for your time, for your graciousness in the communication we've had, and I wish you every success in the future, and I will be breathless with anticipation for where you go from here. Thank you again.
Thank you, Craig. It's very kind of you, and it's been an absolute pleasure.